I've been left with the psychological trauma and the emotional anxiety of having survived such a horrific event.
He laughed. Did you catch that? He laughed. This is blue line Tucker Carlson laughing at the trauma that this guy went through. Oh, it's so funny. Do you think that was funny? When they put a gun in their mouth and blew their brains out, was that hilarious? 140 cops injured. Some so badly they still haven't returned to work. And it's funny. Their trauma's funny. This is the same disgusting treatment that many veterans have gotten after they returned home suffering from PTSD that leads them down the long road to homelessness and eventually suicide. Let me just be clear that Tucker Carlson would have caved in an instant if put in half of the situations that officer was put in. I want to react and talk about how conservative commentators have tried to minimize the testimony of these brave men and have tried to go after these brave men. So, first, I want to talk about the way that these officers were treated during the event. They were attacked. Obviously, bombs were planted outside the DNC and RNC. The media was attacked. There's been over 140 injuries. 2 officers killed themselves afterwards. Weapons were brought and confiscated from people before and after the event. The chemical substances were sprayed at officers. We had officers who were beaten and pulled into the crowd. We had multiple injuries. Of course, the later death of Brian Sicknick. But I wanted to show just a clip here that I found earlier that really highlights how risky and dangerous the job for these people were. Because this footage looks like and sounds like it's from a war zone. This is something I expect to hear and see in Afghanistan, not in Washington, D.C. Not that either is appropriate. So these are officers. This is an officer dragging a second officer back to safety after he was attacked.
Mike, stay in there, buddy. Mike, it's Jimmy. I'm here.
Mike, stay in there, buddy. Mike, it's Jimmy. I'm here. This officer didn't know if the officer he was carrying and trying to save, the Jimmy he refers to, is about to die. Many officers, over 140, were injured during that. That's separate from Brian Sicknick, of course, and the 2 who ended up ending their own lives afterwards due to what they confronted on January 6th. But many officers, as talked about in the testimony, have been injured so badly and have been so scarred by the events that some still, 6 months later, have not returned to service. Who knows if they will ever return to service. So just to play some more footage about how horrific this event was, before looking at how these conservative commentators dismiss this event and the testimony of the heroes who protected our nation's capital. First, we're going to start with our favorite scumbag, Tucker Carlson, and how he reacted to Michael, one of the DC cops who put his life on the line in DC, and his testimony. Let's listen to it.
People he doesn't agree with in Washington. And that is unacceptable, and it should make you very nervous. Watch Fanone cite the psychological trauma he endured as an excuse for ditching our Bill of Rights.
I've been left with the psychological trauma and the emotional anxiety of having survived such a horrific event.
He laughed. Did you catch that? He laughed. This is blue line Tucker Carlson laughing at the trauma that this guy went through. Oh, it's so funny. It's funny when two officers put a gun in their mouth and blow their brains out due to the trauma they faced. Do you think that was funny? When they put a gun in their mouth and blew their brains out, was that hilarious? Was that a laughing stock? Was that something that should elicit laughs from you? Is that funny? 140 cops injured. Some so badly they still haven't returned to work. And it's funny. Their trauma's funny. This is the same disgusting treatment that many veterans have gotten after they returned home, suffering from PTSD that leads them down the long road to homelessness and eventually suicide. This is the type of treatment that increases our casualty numbers during war and conflict because we don't give those officers and troops the mental health care necessary that keeps them from ending their own lives after they see bloody conflict. And it's funny. His trauma's funny. Let me just be clear that Tucker Carlson would have caved in an instant if put in half of the situations that officer was put in. He would have been crying on his knees if he had to deal with half of the situations that officer had to deal with that day. And he found it funny. He found it laughable. That's one reaction that I wanted to show. Here's another reaction from Representative Paul Gosar. If you don't know who Representative Paul Gosar is, he's our favorite representative from Arizona, who also happens to be Nick Fuentes's, the white nationalist who also took part in the conspiracy theory that Trump actually won the election, and his flag was flying on the nation's capital during the insurrection, and he took part in that insurrection. The American First political PAC flags were everywhere on January 6th. I saw them myself. And he, of course, Paul Gosar, spoke at Nicholas Fuentes's political PAC. The same Nicholas Fuentes who downplays and denies the Holocaust and has a long history of anti-Semitic and white nationalist and white supremacist remarks. He, that same Paul Gosar, is offering an amendment to the House spending bill to withhold funding from U.S. Capitol Police. The same Paul Gosar who stands with the blue line, the same conservative movement that stands with the blue line's got to support the police, who hates the defund the police movement of the left. It's the left who wants to defund the police, and then actively is putting out spending bills and amendments to those spending bills which withhold the funding for the defense of the Capitol. Now, I don't want to be too dramatic, but it's a little strange that the Paul Gosar, who's friends with Nick Fuentes, the same Nick Fuentes that he spoke at the event of and was an active participant of the insurrection, is now trying to withhold funding from the police department that defended our nation's capital during said insurrection. Do you think that's coincidental? Do you think it's coincidental he wants to withhold funding from specifically that police department? He can give any reason he wants to in the world, but I find that very strange. Very strange. It's so weird to see. On 1 week, the left wants to defund the police. The left won't support the cops. The left won't support the troops. Stand with the blue line. Then there's an actual attack on our nation's democracy, and everything flips. Well, maybe we should defund the Capitol Police Department that stopped that insurrection. Well, maybe the blue line is a little too thin, as in I'm going to snap it. It's so thin. Well, maybe those officers, their trauma doesn't really matter and they're overplaying it. In fact, those 4 officers and veterans who testified, they're liars. They're left-wing activists. Of course, did they provide any evidence of them lying? Of course not. I tried to get evidence of them lying from people like Redneck the Streamer, and you can't. You get nothing out of them because they didn't lie. I saw it myself. The violence and disgusting behavior that we saw, that insurrection on January 6th, that I saw with my own two eyes, they were telling the truth about. Whether it's the bombs, the racial abuse, the assaults, the weapons, the militarized gear, it being pre-organized, any of it, they told the truth about. And so what they're trying to do is they're reaching for straws, anything they can grab onto to discredit these officers, because they'd rather discredit the officers than accept the truth of what happened on January 6th. Let's go to the next one. The next one I wanted to bring up is a audio file that we were able to get from one of the Capitol Police Departments that testified. That was a slur and threat-filled rant towards not only the officer in question who testified, but was a call to violence against all the officers in our nation's capital on January 6th who kept democracy safe.
Metropolitan Police Officer.
This was a voice, to be specific, this was a voicemail left on the man's phone.
Yeah, this is from Michael Fanone, Metropolitan Police Officer. You're on trial right now, lying, and you want an Emmy, an Oscar? What are you trying to go for here? You're so full of shit, you little You're a little man. I can slap you up the side of your head with a backhand and knock you out, you little You're a punk. You're a lying. How about all the scummy black scum for 2 years, destroying our cities and burning them and stealing all the stores and everything? How about that, assaulting cops and killing people? How about that, you That was on the goddamn Capitol. I wish they would have killed all you scumbags, because you people are scum. They stole the election from Trump, and you know that, you scumbag.
Well, I guess we know who he voted for, don't we?
And you, too bad they didn't beat the out of you. You're a piece of a little you scum.
So he calls him the F-slur a million times, threatens him and his livelihood, and eventually calls for the killing of all of the Capitol Police Department, while adding a hint of racism in there. Well, not even a hint, it was more of an avalanche of racism, saying, instead of stopping the insurrectionists, you should stop the quote-unquote black scum in our nation's cities, aka black people. Well, I think I'm going to stand with the officer instead of this profanity-idiotic racist, this profanity-filled idiotic racist who called into his phone. One last one I want to have is a Fox News segment where Laura Ingraham goes after the officers and veterans in question and accuses them of putting on a Oscar and Emmy-nominated performance. Does she give any proof that they lied? Let's find out.
It is with that knowledge.
By the way, the reason why we're watching this on this account instead of whatever account they would post it on usually on Fox News is because they didn't upload this segment on Fox News. Maybe they will in the future, but they haven't yet. And I wonder why.
It is with that knowledge that we will unveil the Angle Awards for today's best performances. First, for best use of tears and dramatic pauses in a leading role, we have a tie. It's between Congressman Kinzinger and Schiff.
I never expected the day to be quite as emotional for me as it has been. You guys won.
By the way, this guy's a Republican. This is an elected Republican. He's part of the party of Lincoln, quote unquote. The party of Lincoln. He is an elected Republican, and he is in tears, not because he supports some left-wing BLM whatever, but because he saw this for what it is, an attack on our nation's democracy, and his life, as well as the life of everybody else in Congress, was under threat from what happened that day, and officers laid down their lives to protect them. Yes, that type of testimony can bring a man to tears. Do you really think hearing testimony about a man who had to tell his daughter he isn't dead isn't one that could bring you to tears? Lauren, do you have kids? Do you think if you had to call your kids after work and tell them that you're not dead, that isn't somewhat an emotionally heavy experience where you talk about how you had to drag officers injured away, or 140 injuries, bombs being planted, racial abuse as people lobbed the N-word at the black officer who is there to protect democracy. None of that is emotional in nature. What about the 2 officers who blew their brains out after this? Death of Brian Sicknick. None of that derives tears from you? Well, then you know what, Lauren? Then you're just a cold-hearted monster. That's what you are. If none of that can get you at all to feel any compassion for this individual, and means you want to mock them instead, then you're just a prick. Point blank, period.
You guys help. You know, democracies are not defined by our bad days.
We're so driven by bigotry and hate that we attack our fellow citizens as traitors if they're born in another country or they don't look like us.
To be clear, not only were the officers called traitor, I was called a traitor there because I had a Biden hoodie on and I voted differently than them and was threatened with execution. So, you know what? That seems like a particularly healthy democracy that doesn't need any introspection whatsoever.
And God help us.
God save us from these third-rate theatrics. Now, the award for best use of an exaggeration in a supporting role. The winner's Aquilino Gonell, who thinks the pen is literally mightier than the sword.
You have all these items and things that...
By the way, not only is this guy an officer, but he also served in Operation Iraqi Freedom. Just want to make that clear. It's really quick how Lord Ingraham in one instance is going to get outraged about Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, but then in the next sentence go after the same veterans that supposedly she was protecting and trying to respect.
That were thrown at us and attack and used to attack us. Those are weapons. No matter if it is a pen, the way they were using these items, it was to hurt officers.
The award for blatant...
By the way, he's right. I don't know what Lord Ingraham is trying to say, but what he was talking about is how people would use flagpoles with pointed edges as spears, cattle prods to beat cops. Lauren, if someone came after you with a flagpole and started to beat you with it, do you think that would hurt? Do you think somebody could die due to getting beaten with a flagpole or a cattle prod? Or getting stabbed by a pointed spear that was supposed to be a flagpole? Or somebody getting stabbed by a pen? I'm telling you, if I took this pen right here, this metal pen, and I stabbed someone in the neck, that would hurt and could kill somebody. So yes, he was talking about them not only using things like pepper spray and traditional weapons, which were found on people beforehand and afterhand. By the way, thousands of rounds of ammunition and firearms and bombs that were planted outside the DNC and the RNC, but they used other things as weapons as well, which caused over 140 injuries. Some of those officers haven't returned to work yet. I don't know what she's trying to downplay here. I will pay $1,000 to any Fox News host that is willing to get stabbed by a pen full force and then look me in the eyes and tell me it didn't hurt and it isn't a weapon and can't be used as a weapon. I'd love to hear it. I'd love to see that.
Use of partisan politics.
Well, sir, wait, what do you mean he bashed my head in with a rock? A rock is not a sword or a gun, therefore a rock can't do damage. Idiotic.
When facts fail, the Angle Award goes to Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn.
I'm a law enforcement officer, and I do my best to keep politics out of my job. But in this circumstance, I responded. Well, I voted for Joe Biden. Does my vote not count? Am I nobody?
He later deployed all his...
By the way, he's completely right. Because I was there in a Joe Biden hoodie, and the people treated me like I was a traitor because I voted differently. I stood there in a Joe Biden hoodie. I was called an F-slur, I was spit at, I was called a traitor, and threatened with execution. Is that a particularly healthy democracy? Do you think him just expressing like, yeah, I voted for Joe Biden, should mean he should be attacked with vitriol? Means that he should be assaulted? Means, and I wonder why you didn't include this part of the testimony, Laura, that he should have the N-word thrown at him like 20 to 40 times? I don't care if he voted for Joe Biden. He should not have been treated the way he was treated.
His art to accuse Trump of being a hitman.
If a hitman is hired and he kills somebody, the hitman goes to jail. But not only does the hitman go to jail, but the person who hired them does. There was an attack carried out on January 6th, and a hitman sent them. I want you to get to the bottom of that.
We have more on him in a moment.
Well, Laura, why was that? Was it because he spread disinformation about the election being stolen during the insurrection as well? By the way, it wasn't just that he spread disinformation about the election being stolen and has a history of using combative language in speeches or whatever. During the insurrection, as they were storming the Capitol, he continued to egg them on. This is what happened when democracies... I'm trying to remember the exact tweet. If anybody has a link to it, I'd love to see it. But he said something along the lines of, this is what happened when you don't respect the will of the people, and then called on Mike Pence, who later the people on the ground would call for the hanging of. Most political leaders who make statements that cause political violence don't come out and directly say, go storm this, go attack this. They spread conspiracy theories and nonsense that hype people up to the point to violence. And he spread a conspiracy theory. That conspiracy theory being that the election was rigged. He's been spreading that conspiracy theory ever since the Republican primary. Because anytime he'd lose a Republican primary, he'd just say it was rigged or it was a scam or something along those lines. He said before this election that if he lost, it was rigged. He was priming them for years for an event like this. And then he continued to spread election disinformation about evidence of widespread voter fraud that his own staff, which he later fired, said was untrue. As, of course, he called Georgian officials to tell them to just find over 50,000 votes in his favor. Him actively trying to commit and encourage voter fraud. And you don't think he bears any responsibility for what happened that day? Even when he eventually did call them off, he continued to spread election disinformation, saying we know it was rigged, we know it was stolen, but please go home, you're very special, treating the insurrectionists like children. This is so blatant. So blatant. I wonder why they didn't upload this to the Fox News YouTube channel.
Moment, but it's not about politics at all. And for best performance in an action role, the winner is Michael Fanone.
Too many are now telling me that hell doesn't exist, or that hell actually wasn't that bad. The indifference shown to my colleagues is disgraceful.
Oh, wait, let's it was best known for an action role because he got angry and passionate. Because, you know what, Laura? Let's say this happens. Let's say people storm the offices of Fox News and beat over 140 people. 140 people beaten, injured. Some of them never return back to work. 2 of them blow their brains out. Another one dies. Natural causes, but the people say, the medical professionals say, that the events of that day did contribute to it. Bombs were planted. The media was assaulted. And then people tried to downplay what happened. Should you just look into the camera with a smile, show no human emotion whatsoever, just be happy and wave with pretty blue eyes like, oh, hey, everybody, everything's fine? Laura, maybe in the prepared media world where you have learned to show no emotion or compassion for others, and that's how you got the job you have today, not having emotional reactions to your friends getting injured and killing themselves is okay. But in reality, where working class people live and try to survive, people blowing their brains out is a serious occurrence that deserves some emotion. So please forgive him for showing some emotion at people trying to downplay his partner's, and his whole family's pain at the experience. God, man. Absolutely soulless behavior. This damn feigned indignation. Oh, but let's all talk about how this Republican politician was bullied out of a restaurant, how that's tragic. Oh, let's talk about Dr. Seuss. Oh, it's the worst thing ever. Oh, wait. Cops blew their brains out and 140 were injured? Him hitting the table like that. Outrageous. Let's mock it. Despicable, honestly.